Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, the fledgling Lapid-Bennett coalition approaching its first major obstacle on the streets of Jerusalem. Meanwhile, an entire ecosystem unique to a tiny plot in Israel under attack. And finally, the indoor mask mandate lifted. Stay tuned for what's left of Israel's coronavirus restrictions. Israel's brand new government, barely 36 hours old, but having to hit the ground running, the Bennett and Lapid-led coalition already now dealing with its first major obstacle, which many see as a test of the new unity's mettle. I'm talking, of course, about the twice delayed but now approved Jerusalem flag parade. Incoming Public Security Minister Omer Bar-Lev finally giving the green light to the controversial march scheduled for today, telling Israeli media that in a democracy, it's allowed and important to demonstrate within the confines of the law. That said, in order to reduce tensions and the chances for violent outbreaks, the route has been changed to essentially avoid the Old City's Muslim quarter entirely. Moreover, Israeli security forces' presence and the number of Iron Dome batteries deployed have both been increased. This in response to threats from Palestinian Authority officials as well as Hamas terrorists in Gaza, who are calling for a renewed day of rage across the region. Hamas, for its part, also threatening to renew rocket fire against Israeli civilian communities and explosive balloons. Joining us to discuss security details and more surrounding the impending rescheduled flag march and the coinciding Palestinian Day of Rage, Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, Flo Hassan Nahum, and Major Reserves Dan Pfefferman, fellow with the Jewish People Policy Institute and former IDF National Security Advisor. Thank you both so much for being with us today. Now, Deputy Mayor Nahum, I want to start with you. What is the flag march supposed to represent, and how is it carried out in action? Do you believe that the reality of the march matches up with its stated purpose?
Well, the flag march is very simply a celebration of the reunification of our city in 1967, our eternal capital. And every year we have these incredible celebrations. They're not against anybody. They're in favor of this incredible war that we didn't start, and yet we won. We took back Jerusalem from an illegal Jordanian occupation, let's not forget. And so every year we celebrate wonderful young people coming to celebrate the joy of our reunited eternal capital. And that's what it's supposed to be. Now, the fact that a month ago we had to put it off, I think was right. It was right to do so then, because we were literally at the heels of a conflict and a war. And at that moment, perhaps it was wise, but to cancel the march because Hamas in Gaza is trying to dictate our national agenda is ridiculous. We're a sovereign state. We love celebrating our well-deserved victories, and the reunification of our capital city is a well-deserved victory. And I think that my message to the marchers is march with happiness, celebration, and love. Don't march against anybody or anything. March in favor of the Jewish people and the reunification of our eternal capital.
Well, so similarly, do you think that it was appropriate to change the route of the march, considering that it celebrates the reunification of East and West Jerusalem by traveling through East and West Jerusalem, typically?
Well, ultimately, the police changed the route because the most important thing is the safety of the marches and the safety of the people who live in the old city. And so I trust that the police did what they needed to do in order to keep the peace and in order to make things calm. Some people, of course, are very much against the fact that they changed the route, but I think they did so in a very sensitive way. They're going to go to Damascus Gate. They're going to be dancing outside Damascus Gate, but they're going to be going in through Jaffa Gate, which is, of course, right near the Armenian quarter, Jewish quarter. And there will be some people who will walk through the Muslim quarter, and that's okay. There's 5,000 marchers estimated and 2,000 police. So I think that there's enough security here for this, hopefully, to go through peacefully. And again, a celebration of happiness, of love,
Get away. Get out of here.
So, Major Pfefferman, the march officially got the green light, and there have been, as we just said, slight changes to the route in order to largely avoid the Muslim quarter. Do you think that this will affect the negative responses or the day of rage that is scheduled against it?
Well, I mean, even before the march started, we've already seen some clashes with the police, and some escalation from Hamas in Gaza has also began. Look, Israel has a delicate balancing act to perform here. It has to balance the needs of democracy, in which freedom of speech and expression are sacred, while being sensitive to the recent events and recent tensions between the Jewish and Arab populations inside of Israel. And of course, the timing with the new government is also sensitive, especially as it contains for the first time an Arab Israeli party in the governing coalition. And we see that anything that comes to the old city, and especially the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which sits atop the Temple Mount, even the perception, which is often untrue, that anything might be related to Al-Aqsa, can set off emotions and violence in the streets of Jerusalem. So we need to make sure we're allowing people to express their voices in public, as the deputy mayor said, while being sensitive and not creating unnecessary provocations and tensions. And we need to hold by the maxim that sovereign countries should do, and that there's a difference between what you are allowed to do and what you should do. I think the compromise reached with the police, accepted by the government, that the route doesn't go through the Muslim quarter, is a very reasonable, it's a very responsible one. And at the same time, I think and I hope efforts were made to coordinate with Muslim leaders in Jerusalem, in the Old City, even with the Palestinian Authority, to convey this. This will certainly be the first test of this new government.
All right, now staying with you for a moment, Major, I want to speak more about the security coordination that Israel is bracing for a resurgence of violence as threatened by Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. You just mentioned that in some cases clashes erupted long before the flag march, as they did really last month. Iron Dome batteries are being rolled out in extra deployments, and security forces are on high alert. What can you tell us about what actions are being taken specifically and where they're being specifically deployed, and whether you believe, again, that this will be sufficient to counter the expected threat level?
Hamas and even Fatah, the PLO, have used these days of rage often to call out, to try to hamstring our domestic policies in the past. And we can't let outside actors, certainly not hostile outside actors, dictate our domestic policies. And Hamas especially is trying to test us. It's constantly trying to set the rules of engagement that we can't accept. As we saw on Jerusalem Day, they launched the first 7 of over 4,000 rockets in an attempt to dictate and hamstring Israeli policies. And what they're essentially doing is trying to seek out excuses as triggers for escalation that can't be legitimate. We certainly can't accept it. So Iron Dome batteries have been deployed in the south. The IDF is on high alert. It's expected to be able to counter the launch of rockets. The IDF is also preparing to help the firefighter units to try to contain the fires that come from Hamas incendiary balloons. From what I've read, 10 so far have erupted in southern Israel as a result of these Hamas fire balloons. The one thing I would recommend to IDF senior leaders and the political level is Hamas is looking for any kind of excuse to escalate tensions because it serves their purpose. They would love nothing more than to topple this new government, which, as I mentioned, has Israeli Arab participation in for the first time. They're looking to embolden the radicals and they're looking to weaken the moderates. And we have to be careful not to get sucked in to another conflict that serves their purpose and not ours. And so I think as Defense Minister Gantz has already alluded to this, we need to respond at a time and place of our choosing and not play their game. We need to make sure we determine the rules of the game and not let Hamas set those rules.
All right, Deputy Mayor Flor Hassan Nahum and Major Dan Pfefferman, thank you both so much for being with us again.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Now, we may still have many questions for the new Bennett-Lapid government, but one thing is clear. They are officially here, and they do have changes in mind, especially with respect to foreign policy. Hannah Rifkin reporting.
Outgoing Prime Minister Netanyahu taking his new seat in Knesset as the new leader of the opposition, and newly appointed Prime Minister Lapid-Bennett likewise getting acclimated to his new workspaces. Bennett walking through the Prime Minister's office and stopping to meet the staff with whom he'll now be working closely. But offices and chairs not the only things being swapped. Alternate Prime Minister and acting Foreign Minister Yair Lapid revealing the new government's directive with the West. comprised of bridging the supposed divides between DC and Jerusalem. Divides that the change bloc are also blaming on Netanyahu.
הרפובליקנים חשובים לנו, אבל לא רק הם. אנחנו מוצאים את עצמנו, כמו שאתם יודעים היטב, מול בית לבן דמוקרטי, סנאט דמוקרטי, קונגרס דמוקרטי, בית נבחרים דמוקרטי. והדמוקרטים האלה כועסים, ואנחנו צריכים לשנות את דרך העבודה מולם.
Meanwhile, Defense Minister Gantz meeting with American diplomats and security heads to discuss regional issues like Hamas and Iran. But in a related shift in tact, the meetings held largely in private, as opposed to Netanyahu's more public criticisms against controversial U.S. policy, like rejoining the JCPOA nuclear deal. Still, all that said, Israeli foreign and security policy not expected to shift to a major degree.
By and large, we don't expect any major deviation in foreign and security policy. On the main issues of ICC and Iran, the defense establishment is setting the tone in the general direction, and a Bennett-Lapid government is not expected to change that. There are many details to work out, and they will be worked out in collaboration and perhaps with an increased level of trust with the American administration. With respect to the Palestinian issue, we do not see a level of ripeness now to make any diplomatic breakthroughs. The Palestinians are entangled in their own domestic political issues. Perhaps economic reforms will be introduced, but we don't expect any major breakthroughs.
Moving on, Arabic media celebrating the change in Israel's government. The question is, are they celebrating with us or at Israel's expense? This as now former Prime Minister Netanyahu calling the new government's foreign policy weak, which in turn is raising questions of how Arab states are viewing the new Bennett-Lapid coalition. So joining me now to explain is Middle East expert and lecturer at Bar-Ilan University, Dr. Mordechai Kedar. Dr. Kedar, thank you so much for joining us. Now, how is this change in government being perceived by Arab media? It seems conflicting, as Bennett is seen as either a protege of Netanyahu's or the head of the unity government, including an Arab party.
Well, you could compare it to what happens in the Israeli media. There are people who love the change, and there are people who mourn this change. The same thing is the Arab world. Those who actually acknowledged the power of Netanyahu and his ability to influence American and Russian presidents and decision makers definitely mourn his leaving because they are afraid of Iran and they are afraid of all kinds of terrorism, which Netanyahu was very decisive against. While others who did not like the decisiveness of Netanyahu and his influence on international decision makers definitely celebrate his leaving, but some of them are afraid of Bennett because some of them think that Bennett is more right-wingish than Netanyahu. So it's you can see all kinds of reactions in the Arab world. Nobody really knows what will be in the future because there is no prophet in the media, and so everybody tries to predict something, but nothing is based on facts.
All right, so that's interesting because now Netanyahu is asserting that the new government is having a weak foreign policy. Do his claims ring true at all, especially with the change of the guard in the Israeli government? Do you see Arab states trying to take advantage of the new government? Again, you said that there are conflicting thoughts on this matter.
Well, again, you expect me to be a prophet and to expect what will be the reaction of, let's say, Meretz, the left-wingish, or even the Islamic movement, to all kinds of policies which reflect right-wingish thinking in the government. What will be their reaction? Will they stay in spite of the right-wingish policies of the government, or will they threaten to leave or actually leave? If they leave, they actually lose all the achievements which they have. And the Islamic movement definitely has very, very significant achievements by joining the coalition. The question is, how long can they take all kinds of policies which are against their ideology and their thinking And this definitely I cannot predict because they never told me what their plans are.
So, so what are Arabic media sources saying again, though, about the inclusion of the Islamist Ram party in the coalition? Is it at all effective in dispelling the libel of Israel being an apartheid state, for example?
Well, again, it depends on which media you read and or watch, and what is the agenda of the person who speaks or writes. If he is against the Muslim Brotherhood, so he actually makes fun out of Israel for getting in bed with the Muslim Brotherhood, as if here in Israel we don't know what this organization is. This actually you can find very largely in Egypt, because in Egypt, as you might know, first of all, the Muslim Brotherhood are illegal, all of them. And 2 days ago, an Egyptian court inflicted death penalty to 12 leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Death penalty. So here in Egypt, they hang them up. And here in Israel, they are in the government. So many Egyptians actually make fun out of Israel. What? Don't you know what this organization is? What do they stand for? What is their agenda? What do they want from Israel? They don't want Israel to be at all. So some of the Egyptian anti-Muslim Brotherhood actually make fun out of Israel for this government, which is aligning itself with the Muslim Brotherhood. Others who are siding with the Muslim Brotherhood definitely think it's a good idea, because this way the Muslim Brotherhood can take over the Israeli public opinion, or the public sphere, or even the decision making. So it depends on who writes and who talks in the Arab media. And as you know, in many cases, Arab media today are open to all kinds of ideas, conflicting ideas. There are arguments, and it's okay. They live with this very, very well.
All right, well, with all the different opinions and the speculations, we'll have to see, as with other things, just how things play out in real life. Dr. Mordechai Kadar, thank you so much for joining us.
Have a good evening.
In other news, an entire natural habitat in Israel, the only one of its kind on the planet, now under existential threat. The underground cave, cut off from the rest of the world for over 5 million years, housing an incredibly unique and diverse ecosystem. But it could all be destroyed in a heartbeat if pending floodwater management plans are allowed to continue. Here to discuss, Chief Scientist with the Israel Nature and Parks Authority, Dr. Yehoshua Shkedi. Dr. Shkedi, thank you so much for being with us. Now, first off, what can you tell us about this ecosystem? Where exactly is it, and what makes it so unique?
Well, this ecosystem is in the middle of Israel, just between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, next to the main road. It is underground. It is very unique because the primary production, like usually what we see what plants are doing when they are taking CO2 from the air and converting it into sugars, using daylight, this ecosystem depends on energy that is coming from inside the earth, from sulfur ions, sulfides, that gives energy to the system and make what we call chemosynthesis. Chemosynthesis meaning you're doing the synthesis of sugar without daylight. That's why it is so unique. It is underground. It was covered for 5 million years and maybe more. And it was opened up just when the mine just opened a hole in the ecosystem that threatened it. And now there is another threat to the cave.
Well, so as I understand it, having been cut off from sunlight for so long, we have creatures that are translucent or clear, colorless, or often blind. What kinds of creatures call this cave home, and what have we or can we learn from them and from this site, really?
The creatures that live there, of course, the creatures that do not see daylight in the life, meaning if you have there scorpions or small crabs, they do not have eyes, or their eyes do not see, because they live in complete darkness, and they cannot use eyes for nothing. More than that, they lost the colors, so they're all whitish, very pale, and they are really different from everything we know above ground. We can learn from that. It cannot serve us in a kind of ecosystem services, but just knowing that the system is there, just knowing that the amount of creatures that live there are so unique, it's for me, it's amazing and wonderful.
So what happens if this ecosystem is destroyed? What are the ultimate ramifications of that? If there are ramifications that extend beyond the destruction of the ecosystem itself?
I cannot answer that. I think if you have an ecosystem like that, it is huge. It is unique on the international level. Nothing else is there. I think this is enough to protect it. I believe this is enough to protect it, and that's what we're doing.
So have you, I understand that you're looking to establish the site as a protected nature reserve. Are you making progress in that front?
Yes, it is not as fast as I want it to be, but yes, there are plans to make it a nature reserve, even though no people will come there for a visit, because if we were coming there for a visit, we bringing with us all kind of pests into the cave, and we're bringing light, and we're bringing oxygen, and we're changing the ecosystem. So we are creating a nature reserve that nobody is going to enter except some scientists, and while we're doing monitoring, and nothing else will go there. Yes, that's the goal, to make a nature reserve which will be closed forever for 99.99999% of humans on Earth.
All right, well, I know that in addition to that, you've also provided the government with some alternatives for how to deal with the rainwater. So I wish you good luck.
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Shkedi, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Now for some great news. There is a new government in charge, but the old health ministry promises are still holding. As of today, and with few exceptions, Israelis will not be required to wear coronavirus masks anywhere, neither indoors nor outdoors nor in any size of crowd. And this marking the end of practically the last major pandemic-related restriction in the country. The decision coming as morbidity and infection in Israel drops to effectively nothing. As I mentioned, though, there are some exceptions. Workers or guests, for one, who have not been vaccinated or who have not recovered from coronavirus at a state welfare institution must still wear masks indoors, as do people in long-term care facilities or homes for the elderly, and people en route to quarantine or on a flight. Schools, meanwhile, not even really addressed, but it's been said that they'll still require masks for the time being, as the majority of students under 16 have yet to get their vaccinations. The health ministry saying that they'll consider dropping masks in schools as well, though, if morbidity continues to drop and vaccinations continue to climb. Now let's take a look at the weather forecast with Chana Rifkin.
Well, some clouds heading our way today and tomorrow with miracle showers up in Haifa, but looking at this evening, summer lows are expected to be between 17 and 22 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow, expected highs will get to between 25 and 36 degrees Celsius, depending on where you are in the country. And now, back to Aaron in the studio.
Thank you, Chana. Now, before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel.
Linoi Ashram of Israel, the fifth strongest in qualifying.
Here we have Linoi Ashram, Israel's amazing gymnast who won gold and 2 silver medals in the European Gymnastics Championships in Varna, Bulgaria. A routine with the pair of clubs scored Ashram 28.5 points and the gold medal. The club's gold medal joined then with 2 silvers that she scored in the competition over the weekend in the ball and hoop category, and she placed 4th in the ribbons exercise. So congratulations, Linoi Ashram. All right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.24 shekels to the American dollar and 2.66 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.